Hello, everybody, and welcome to our What's New in AutoCAD 2026 webinar. We are very excited to have you all here today. Before we go ahead and get started, we're going to go through some logistics here. James, if you can jump to that next slide for me.
Yes, sir.
All right. So just some quick announcements. All attendees will be muted throughout this presentation. You can send us your questions via the questions box or the chat box, and we will be answering those at the end during the Q&A session. This webcast will be recorded and should be available later on today on our social media as well as um, on our YouTube channel. Any questions, concerns, anything of that nature, you can give us a call at 305-445-6480 or email us at info@dbscad.com. All right, without further ado, James, go ahead and take it away.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Alan, for the very nice intro. Let's get going then. Okay, we're starting off first with the drawing startup options. Okay, as you can see, some of us old timers will kind of recognize that dialog box a little bit. And there is a couple of things that you need to do. So let's go ahead and see how that actually works. Okay. Now we will go ahead and say new here because I want you to see something interesting. If I go to new, you'll notice that by default is going to give us the ACAD.dwt, right? Which is actually the one that actually is going to be used here. It is not your Office standard. Okay, so we go ahead, or by the Office standard template. So we'll go ahead and say new here, and you'll notice that it gives us no dialog box. You see that? So let's say, for example, what happens if we go to new up here? And the only thing that it actually allows us to do is to select the template that we're going to be using. Okay, so the question really becomes now is how do we actually switch this over to have that dialog box? Well, the first thing we need to do is invoke the startup variable in this fashion, select startup, and by default, it usually gives you the no dialog box whatsoever. In order to get the dialog box, you need to switch it over to number one and hit the enter key and then close this particular drawing. So now if you go here, you're going to get the same thing. You're not going to get the dialog box. This does not give you the dialog box. The only way to get the dialog box is going to be through this little icon here. So when I hit that little icon, it gives us the beginning of the dialog box. Is going to ask us for advanced or quick setup. We're going to go to the advanced setup so we can see the process, and we'll say okay to that. Once we do that, you'll see here, this is the process that we're going to be going through. Each one of the steps in the beginning, obviously, is going to be the units. Let's go ahead and call it out for the architectural and set our precision here. Okay, next we'll hit the next button, obviously, and will take us to the angle. And what this is defining is the type of angles that we're going to be using. As an architectural type of project, we would probably use the decimal degrees, which is what is set here, but we can select any other type of the Z, not the Z, sorry, any type of values that we want to use. And also we can set up our precision right there. So once we do that, we'll go ahead and say the next button here. And this is defining where 0 is. As you can see, east is selected and is defining east as 0. If we switch it over, as you can see, it actually switches the 0 or where actually all the angles start from, okay? We will leave it as the usual default, even when we were actually drafting by hand, it was east to be 0, just like the protractors. As a matter of fact, these two items here are based on the protractors. So what we'll say 0 is east, we'll say next, and this is going to obviously, like we had the protractors, all angles were measured counterclockwise, which is by default how it's set up. You can switch it, but we'll leave it in the counterclockwise setup. Next, we'll say see the area. Now here, I do have to give you a bit of a heads up. The area, you'll notice that you're putting 1 foot by 9 inches. That's a very small area. So if your building is a lot larger than that, you best make it larger. And I would usually say, why don't you go ahead and use the size of the sheet that you're going to be using, and then just go ahead and do your your scale factoring to that. So if I'm using a 2436 at a 1/4 inch, we're looking at 144 feet by 96 feet. So that the value of the foot value is what I would put in here. Okay, be aware of that. And the reason why I'm making that very specific distinction here is because remember, if your limits are on, you can't draw outside that border that you're defining, that area that you're defining. If your limits are off, you can't. You need to keep that in mind. So when I say finish here, obviously we have our drawing set up, okay? So that's how we actually go ahead and invoke the startup. Once again, it says invoke the startup variable. It's set to 1 right now. I'm going to switch it back to 3 and close. And then you need to close the drawing. Okay, you have to do that. All right. Let's go ahead and now take a look at our next topic, which is going to be cloud configuration and drawings. Okay. This one is really sweet, especially for those of us who work constantly on, and I have to make this distinction, Autodesk Docs. I have not tried it in the Dropbox or any other third-party cloud storage. I've only worked it with Autodesk, so I don't know the Autodesk Docs. I don't know if it works the same way in the other ones. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Okay, let's go ahead and create a new drawing. I know I'm not going through this. Just don't need to see it again. We've already seen it. But at this point, what we need to do first, if we right-click Options here, okay, this is set up to your C drive, okay, by default. In order to actually get that to do have to say that Save As does not necessarily work. Okay, you have to go through the pathing system. And that's why I'm choosing the save. I go to Autodesk Docs, which is the cloud. I go to DDS CAD, where we have our particular project already set up. And we'll just call this one to be deleted, just so we understand what's going on with this. And we go ahead and say save that. So now this particular drawing is in the cloud. So once it's in the cloud, we right click and go to options, and our dialog box changed a little bit. You see that? Now, this sometimes happens like this or doesn't happen like that. There is a dialog box that happens that occurs here. And rather than actually go through all of the process of going through that, I will say that that particular dialog box is going to have a little button here that says setup. When you click on that button that says setup, it's going to give you a dialog box. And all you really have to do is click next, 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 or complete, or whatever it is that it says. You don't really have to do anything. It does it automatically, and then it gives you this. Now, you will notice that you say, well, all of these things are actually pathed properly because all of the things they look the same. The reason for that is because it maintains the AutoCAD settings, classics right here. If we open it up, this looks very much like the non-cloud-based pathing. But the most important part really happens to be up here. Okay, as you can see, it says project settings. It is for the projects. Now, it could be my settings, okay, which is something that could be to you specifically. Because you have these two types of settings, I would highly advise for you to have the setup of this particular pathing system done by the CAD manager or by the project manager. You don't want many people doing all kinds of setups and then nobody's going to know exactly what's going on with the project. Best to have someone that is assigned to set up all of these paths and that person alone to set it up. That way, everybody is uniform in working and everybody most likely will adhere, and it's not most likely, definitely, the pathing should be set up according to Office standards as we usually do. Okay, so as you've seen now, this has been the cloud configuration for drawings or drawing projects on the cloud. Moving forward, let's see what we've got. The next one is going to be hatch improvements via command line. And that's the important part. This is not going to be available in your tabs or ribbon, okay? So let's see how this works. Really, what we're looking at here, let me just close these things out a little bit here. Save changes to this, no. Okay, and let's go ahead into the hatch improvements. And I've already drawn a couple of things, but I want you to see some of the caveats that are happening here and how you actually get to do the proper thing. So what we do is we come home to the Home tab and we go to Hatch. Now this, as the stated in the slide, improvements via command line. And for that, you need to go here to Mode. And in Mode, when you select Mode, it's going to give you area and path. So we're going to be dealing with these two little options right here. Okay, we'll go ahead and set up for a path first. And, hypothetically, we want to set up maybe an area here that is going to be maybe, let's say 5 feet, and it's going to be a no parking area. Just to give it some sort of a utility to this. So in order to do that, we first we set up the width, and we see that the width, not by default, I have been playing with this a little bit and it's set to 2 feet. We said we wanted to set up to 5 feet. So we set up that width of this area that we're going to hatch to be 5 feet, this path. Now, you'll notice that it says select objects. You see here? I would not do that, and this is the reason why. If I say select objects and I start to select these lines, it would stand to reason that it would trace this line as the path, but it doesn't. You see that? Okay, so this is obviously the wrong way to doing it. So what I would do, go ahead and call path again. Let's go ahead and mode again and path. I would go ahead and set up my width as we have set it, and then I would start to trace it. Now there is an option for arc right here. Okay, we just set up the arc. Be careful, it doesn't necessarily adhere to the arc that we have drawn. You gotta be careful. You have to come back and adjust that. Then we have to switch back to line. Okay, and then finish defining our line, hit the enter key to finish, and we terminated the item. Then hit the escape key, and this is set up. At this point, then you can come over here and obviously set up whatever values you want to set up as you want them to be. Let's go ahead and put this 48. And there it is, okay? So that's how we do that part. But there's something even more interesting. If I actually have this selected, I have some options here, which is set up boundary and generate boundary. If I generate boundary, what really happens is it traces this polyline and it creates a separate object from that. It's pretty ordinary, but the really cool one is set boundary. So because if I set boundary, the boundary for this one is defined by the actual hatch itself as we defined it, but we can say, no, it's this one. Okay, and we hit the enter key, and then do you want to erase the previous one or not? I'm going to say no to that. Erase selected line work, okay? Yeah, I'm going to say no. I don't want to erase the selected line work. I'm going to hit the enter key. No, what happens? It actually went ahead and passed it over, okay? So there's some flexibility happening here. I still would say be careful, because if you remember, this particular arc is not as perfect as we thought it would have been, okay? You still have to kind of move this around a little bit like that. And then you have some problems. I saw some problems earlier. Here it is. You see that? Some things are not kind of matching. This could be that because my arc is actually drawn differently. I don't know, but be careful about that. It's something to be aware of. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the next topic, which is going to be, sorry, wrong one. This one right here, smart blocks from imported PDFs. Now, there is some caveats that we have to actually point out very clearly here. Okay, this is from an imported PDF, and that's how we're working it. Okay, what happens when you import a PDF? You lose the intelligence because it's a PDF. It generates PDF layers. It does not generate layers that are conforming to your AutoCAD standards for the office. You need to be very aware of that, okay? And with that in mind, let's take a look and see how that works. Okay, let's go ahead and close this out. Save changes, no, and let's look at smart blocks conversions here. Okay, and this has been already converted from a PDF. Okay, as you can see, if I select an object and I go properties, that's what I was talking about. If I look at the layer configuration, we do have some layers already in here, but we have these created. These layers right here are coming from the PDF conversion. So when you actually select convert to generate PDF layers, this is what it's talking about. Okay. I would do some experimenting and see if I can actually get it to, you could actually get it to actually default or switch it over to your Office standard layers, but I wouldn't guarantee that. Okay. Maybe we'll create a blog about that later if we find a solution, when we find a solution. Okay. So need to be very aware of this. Okay. So the actual command that we're looking for is going to be in inserts here under blocks. You'll see the search and convert, which you have two options, the detect and convert, and you have your search and convert. Let's take a look at detect and convert first. Okay, it's actually giving you a dialog box. There is a restriction on types of objects that you can that it will select. Here are the types of objects that it will select. It's restricted to these. Okay, be careful. This is still under development. We see a lot of great things in the future, but be careful. As you can see, and we're going to start with this one right here. It's showing me that there are two of these. If I look at the drawing, yes, there are two, but no, not really. There are three. So if we select the object, set the settings here, look what happens. It's selecting the two. There's a third one. It hasn't selected it. Okay. There's also a little tab up here that should look very familiar to you guys. This kind of looks like the XREF compare and the drawing compare dialog boxes that we've seen before that have been kind of been introduced slowly but surely into the AutoCAD environments. Okay, so if we have to actually go ahead and say convert here, we can convert these into whatever it is. You will also notice that it's selecting these lines, and there's 22 of those. What the heck are those? Well, once again, you need to be careful because that's a hatch. It actually recognizes the hatch for some reason as a block, as a possible block, which is not. In this particular case, that's a hatch. Okay. You will also notice that if I select doors, there's three doors selected. We can actually page just like in the other tabs for other utilities, such as the XREF utilities, and it will page us through whatever selections are there. But notice one thing, it selected these three, but there is in fact a fourth. It should have at the very least defined this as a secondary set of blocks, but it didn't. It just ignored it completely. The other thing that is actually interesting is it did recognize, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I said, maybe it's because it's got a very fancy kind of a frame block in the block here, but no, it's not, because I have the same kind of frame here. You see that? So if I select the set, it tells me two, and this is remember, it will recognize double swing doors, which is recognizing these two, but it does not recognize this one for some reason. Once again, we're talking about something that is under development, okay? There are a couple of other things that you can do. For example, you can actually come over here, and in this particular little icon is primary options. Okay, you can change primary or edit primary. This allows you to add to the selection or subtract from the selection. Or in this one, you can select another type of object that you want to be actually looking at. Okay, so that's what these two are going to do. We're not going to get into it too much because I do think there is a better way of actually doing this. Okay, so let's go ahead and X out of this here. You have to X out of this one. Let's go ahead and close this one here. And let's go ahead and look at this a little bit further. And we see that we have this little box here. That's not a box, it's a rectangle or a square. Okay, that is really looks like it's defining the 18 by 18 square concrete columns. Okay, so we can actually come over here and say, okay, search and convert. We're going to search and convert for this particular item. Okay, once we have that selected, we hit the enter key and it automatically selects all of those shapes that all of those other shapes that conform to the original that we're using as the template to search for. Okay, notice also you have this gear here. If you open the gear, it's telling you to include existing blocks. So if you have blocks already defined in this particular drawing, you can actually include those if these are already part of that. Okay, and also rather include text variations, which is going to be very important in the next demonstration that we're going to have. But for now, we're looking just at the particular little square that becomes our column. So we'll say convert. Okay, in this particular point, it's going to tell us that it's using the geometrical center. The geometrical center happens to be right there. That's the geometrical center. It's talking about if you combine several objects that you are using to define this block, it's going to look at the center of I would call it something like I don't know, the center of all of those objects combined rather than the individual center of each. I can actually turn it and say, well, I don't want that. I'm going to select it myself and I'm going to select it to be that. Okay. Now automatically it switches it over to that very specific spot and we say, okay, is it going to be part of an existing block? And it will list all the blocks that are there. Okay. Or is it going to be part of a new block, which is really what we're going to be looking for because this is a column, or let's call it square column. Okay. And then we can say we're going to place these columns that we're going, or block that we're creating right now in the layer A column. So it allows us to go ahead and place it in the columns, okay, in the columns layer. The other thing that I want you to see is you notice that the include text variations is grayed out. This whole section is grayed out, which is, once again, we're going to see how that works in the next demonstration. Once we have that all that done, we'll say convert, and everything has been converted to a block. But look at the interesting thing. It didn't change the color. It didn't even change a lot of the things we actually asked it to change. The only thing that it changed is that when it created that particular block, it put it on the A columns layer. That's all it did. But really, we want to see this in the proper color. Right now, it's going to be plotting as white. And if you don't have anything assigned, any thickness assigned to that white color, we got a problem. So how do we fix that? We right click here and we go over here to the, oops, sorry, give me a second. Select the block here. Right click and go to block editor. And in block editor is where we do all of the work. Let's go ahead and create and select, oops, sorry. Block editor. Okay, let's go ahead and select that. Go to block editor again. Select the item, right click properties. Okay, and in properties, once again, here's the problem. Okay, it created the block, but it created the block in the A columns layer. It didn't do anything to the geometry itself. That's what it's doing. So you need to be careful about that because you need it to conform to your office standards, correct? And for that, you need to come here. At this point, this is now now being drawn according to our office standards. Save changes to the item, say yes, close this, and there you are. All of your columns are now in the proper color, which makes it in the proper thickness. Okay. Now let's take a look at the next step, which has to do with very much with the same one. We kind of got a little bit of a glimpse when I kind of chose the wrong slide. So let's go ahead and move to the proper slide, which is the proper slide, which is convert plain text to attributes. Now, this is really, really interesting that it does that because it allows us to save a little time in the creation of things. So let's go ahead and take a look and see how this actually is going to work. The creation of attributes based on a PDF insert. Let's go ahead and switch back to our drawing. Let's close this out. And let's go ahead into the convert to plain text. Okay, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select this object, which is the text that we want to convert to a attribute, correct? And we'll just go ahead into the insert and we'll say search and convert. It identifies it, not a problem, right? But when we say convert, that's grayed out. And this is the problem. So the way we did it, the way we selected the text itself and said we're going to convert this text into a block, it thinks that the text itself is the block, not that the text is an attribute. So in order to get that to work properly, okay, we need to come in and select not only the geometry, but the text. So the text is associated with the geometry. Then we go ahead over here and say select and convert. Then it catches it all. Then now this is not grayed out anymore, not even here, not just here, but also in the convert. Okay, notice that it's now giving me that option. It's no longer grayed out. So let's go ahead and say new block. Let's go ahead and call this one a square column. Let's be consistent here. Let's go ahead and pick the insertion point, which is going to be the geometrical center of the rectangle or a square. Let's go ahead and place it in the A columns. Okay, remember you have that cavet that we saw before. Okay, and now we're going to say define attributes. Okay, what is the attribute name? This is column underscore. Why do I want to underscore? I'm going to show you. See that? Just like when you create an attribute, it doesn't accept sizes in the tag name. So we have the option for underscore, and we say size, and it's already giving you an answer. We'll say okay. Once we check and make sure that everything is the way we want it, we say convert. Okay. Again, the problem with the layers is wrong. You see that? So if we actually select this object, go to block editor, and we select this object, right click properties, there it is. Okay. So ideally, you would want to actually make it maybe in the A columns layer and switch the color to that. I use cyan for all of my text, so that's why I chose that color. And obviously we have to change the properties on the square that we need. So this, oops, too many things selected. Well, it's going to be the same layer anyway. Okay, and that object is going to be by layer. That's why it turned green. We say close block editor, save changes, and look what happened. Okay. Notice that the text didn't change. Yes, the text is in the correct layer. Yes, the text is assigned the correct color, but it doesn't show it. And that is, once again, something that I'm sure they're working on. Right now, it is, like I said, we said earlier, this is what is called a advanced view of some of the coming options that we have available in AutoCAD. Okay, so with that, we have now reached the end of our demonstration. I am going to turn it over to Alan for some questions and answers, and take it away, Alan.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim. We are just nearing the end of our time here. So let me see if we have time for just one or two questions here real quick. Um, Bear with me here, some technical difficulties. All right. First one, can you use Office templates instead of default templates used in the
I
startup
have thought
command?
about, yeah, that's a question that actually popped up when I was actually looking at the dialog box. By default, it's actually using the ACAD.dwt. I would say that if you override the ACAD.dwt with your template, yes. But here's the question. The real serious question is, why would you do that? Don't you set up your units and all of those things, so the units and the angle of measure and the precision and all that stuff? Don't you set that up in your AutoCAD template? And remember, this is the other thing that you have to think about, is you have different types of templates because you have different types of projects. Educational projects, you have correctional projects, you have residential projects, multi-residential projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you deal with that? So I would say that this particular dialog box that comes up is more than anything oriented to something that you want to do real quick and you don't have a lot of time to set up anything, maybe prototyping or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's very useful, but if you have your template set up properly, it becomes a little bit of null and void. Any more questions, Alan?
Yep, one last one here, and then we'll go ahead and finish up. Is there a workaround for the smart block issue that we ran across in the demo?
Well, there's a workaround. I'm thinking that maybe I have to try it, and we're actually going to be making blogs about some of these things now that I think about it, because they're actually interesting questions. Uh, I would say that maybe select with the quick filter in AutoCAD, select all the text and then switch them over to the proper layer and switch them over to the proper colors. And maybe then it will do it. I'd have to try it out. I haven't tried it out. And the only other thing is that I would do the same thing with the blocks, with the squares. But you would have to do them in as a collection. You can't do it in just one. I don't think it's going to pick it up and just do it on all of them. If you do it on just one and you select that one, I do not think it's going to apply to all of them. I would have to like that's why I said use the quick select in AutoCAD to select all the text and then switch to all the text to the proper layer and the proper color. I do not think it's going to pick it up because I just didn't see it happening. Once again, this is just what's called, and this is the proper terminology that I used erroneous proper terminology earlier. This is a preview of coming technology. It's not completely ready, but they decided it is useful enough to actually put it out there. Okay? Any other questions?
All right. Well, that's all we have time for, unfortunately. If you did send in questions and we didn't have a chance to get to them, do reach out to us at info@ddscad.com and we'd be happy to answer those for you. Just to go ahead and close off here, James, if you jump to that last slide for us.
Sorry about
Okay,
that,
so
Alan.
no, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, James, for the great presentation. And be on the lookout for some future webinars coming up very soon. For any questions or to reach out to us for any of our software or service offerings, you can reach out to us at 305-445-6480 or email us at info@ddscad.com. Okay, all. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. You all have a good one. Be safe.